agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a professor of political science at Northern Kentucky University. I'm joined today by my conservative counterpart, Cleveland area attorney and defender of freedom, Jay Carson.
Hey, good morning, Mike.
Hey, Jay, how are you doing this morning?
Well, I'm gonna try like Elon Musk to make this not a free for all hellscape.
Well, I think that's a good goal. Yeah, absolutely, and we are.
Yeah, those were his words. I saw that. I just really liked. Yeah,
that's a good. Yeah, I like that too.
Free for all hellscape.
That should be maybe a motto, not a free for all hellscape of the politics guys. Yeah. But I should point out that couple of things. Number one, we are recording this a day earlier than we normally do Friday morning. So if big things happen between now and the time you normally listen, it's not that we ignored them. It's just that, we're doing this a little bit early. And that's in part because if you were listening last week, you'd know that Trey mentioned that he and Ken would be on, and that was the plan. But, life intervened. Listeners, you know that Trey has and really had a long-term struggle with some health issues. She's been very open about that. And so that came up again. And so Jay and I jumped in to kind of take over this week. And so Trey it might be, we're not sure exactly how long it will be before he gets back on, but we want to make sure he has all the time he needs to feel better and so forth. And we hope that's very quick and he's back soon. So we just wanted to kind of give you an update on that. So, all right. Today, we do have a bunch of stuff to talk about. We're going to get into the Fetterman-Oz debate and more generally the midterm elections, which are coming up very shortly here. The Republican Party and Ukraine, a whole bunch of Ukraine stuff, actually. Some things on COVID. We haven't talked about COVID in a while, but, it's still a thing. Some economic news and maybe more, a whole bunch of stuff, and we will get to that in just 1 second. All right, Jay. So, a few months ago, I'd say the Democrats had good reason to feel that, we'd be in pretty good shape. It looked pretty clear, at least to some folks, that, we'd retain control of the Senate for the next couple of years at least. And maybe there were some crazily optimistic Democrats who said, I think there's a chance we can hold the House. But, things have sure changed. It's less than 2 weeks until Election Day, and there's no question that even the most delusional Democrats would have to say that momentum has shifted to the Republicans, and most election models see control of the Senate as more or less a toss-up. And honestly, it would take a not-so-minor miracle for Democrats to retain control of the House. And so all of that, I think, made the stakes in Tuesday's debate between Democrat John Fetterman and Republican Mehmet Oz seem, especially high given the 50-50 nature of the Senate. And even the most forgiving of viewers, I think, would be hard-pressed to honestly say that the debate did anything but hurt Fetterman. I mean, he was clearly struggling to comprehend, to articulate. I mean, he began his opening remarks by saying, "Hi, good night, everybody." And normally you think that would be a funny kind of gaffe, but to me, I watched part of this, it just really felt sad and kind of painful to watch. And so, Jay, I guess I'd like to get your take on this, starting with the debate itself. And then I thought we could kind of move into the Fetterman-Oz campaign in general, and then maybe some thoughts on, and if we have any other thoughts on the midterms.
Yeah, so I guess I would join in. I did not watch all of the debate. I've seen clips and the excerpts and so forth. My sense is that this was just sort of a rolling dumpster fire, sort of situation for Fetterman, and to me, it's not even. And I'm not the first person to say this. Plenty of commentators have said this, so it's I don't want to claim this is my original idea or view, but the fact that everybody's saying it, I think, is sort of significant. It's not even so much that Fetterman put in a poor debate performance, or you would say, listen, he's got some issues. He's still struggling with the effects of his stroke. I think the big downside is that months and months and months, the Fetterman campaign and the Democratic Party have been saying, "Oh, he's fine, nothing to worry about, no problem here," and that's really not the case, and for reasons that I don't know, whether it's Fetterman personally, whether it was the party, whether it was but whomever made the decision that he should remain the candidate. When there were other candidates, if he had the stroke just before the primary, and they could have replaced him on the ballot, and there were plenty of other really viable candidates in Pennsylvania. That seems to be a mistake, both in the political sense and I think in the human sense, right? That you're putting a guy in a position that he's just not able to fulfill, right?
Yeah, and I think
there was a little bit of it, a little bit echoes of you'll remember this, Ross Perot and Admiral Stockdale.
Yeah, and the presidential debate, he was Perot's vice presidential candidate, and he came out on the stage for the VP debate saying, "Who am I? Why am I here?" And it seemed like he was this confused old guy. Yeah.
He was definitely not ready for. And again, I'm not even saying that necessarily Admiral Stockdale had any sort of cognitive decline or something like that, or was dealing with some kind of health issue. It's more just you took someone who was not ready for this and not able to do this, and you put him in the spotlight, and it went badly.
And I think, before we get into this, I'll take issue a little bit with your interpretations. I don't think they're unreasonable, but, it's clear that the Fetterman campaign did all they could to resist debating and to put it off until as late as possible because they had concerns about his ability to perform, and I think that they clearly underestimated what the additional stress of having that debate would do. And so I could certainly envision a scenario in which in debate prep it was like, well, he's a little rough, but it should be okay. But then when you have the live nature and the hot lights and all that, and that becomes a different sort of thing. And that's understandable that he performed worse than maybe the campaign expected, even with setting low expectations, and even given the fact that before his stroke he was not necessarily the best debater in the world. But I guess I'll take issue a little bit with what you said, or offer a slightly different narrative, and that's about the debate whether or not Fetterman should have been replaced. I think there's a difference, not the replace thing, but about the campaign line. Now, I think that's one way to look at it, and certainly the narrative on the right, and I understand this, is that the campaign at best misled or did way too much spinning about how healthy John Fetterman is. But I think another way to look at it is, well, what do we mean by how well someone is? It's one thing to say, well, is he well enough to perform the duties, the things that would be expected of him as a United States Senator, as opposed to, well, is he well enough to be able to very quickly on the spot respond with verbal dexterity in a high pressure sort of environment? That's clearly the answer to that is no. But my question is, well, what is expected of a United States Senator? In other words, to what extent do debates actually even kind of track as to what a senator does in regular life? And I would argue that you could say that, well, not much at all. Actually, does it really matter that John Fetterman struggled for words, in the moment, in the heat of the moment? I would say that doesn't really tell us a whole lot, except for the fact that he is not at that point yet in his recovery. So I don't think it's unreasonable to say, well, yeah, he's not going to be a good debater, but that doesn't mean that he can't do what is required as a United States Senator.
Right. No, I get where you're coming from, but isn't what the Senate does is debate.
Well, no, that's not.
I mean,
I said that's not what they do at all.
part of-
No, I've said that's not at all. In fact, I think the idea that anything happens on the Senate floor that matters even a little bit, aside from going viral on social media or what have you, that's not.
I get what you're saying, that look, it's not really a debate in terms of when on the Senate floor, right? The votes are done and counted before anybody goes out there, or they wouldn't go out there. And it's just you're given the kind of presentation. It's not necessarily a debate. So no, I understand that point. And in that case, there is this sort of, as Ken said, are you better off with a dead Democrat than a live Republican? It's just a whatever jersey the person's wearing, right? But I think there's also something to be said that we look to those discussions, whether they're legit debates or not, or it's just kind of kabuki theater on the Senate floor or the House floor or on the stump, as sort of proxies for our national debate, national discussion, right? And we sort of expect that if you're going to be a leader, you should be able to articulate your position, your party's position on issues. And I think that's part of it, whether you say it's fair or not. But I mean, you look back at, great politicians, and I think you look to people who are, oratory is part of the job. Now, look, is that the job for everybody? There are probably plenty of people in the Senate, certainly plenty of people in the House who, never make a great speech in their life, but can ably serve their constituents. They never necessarily get into a debate, certainly in the format that you see, in a campaign in their daily lives as a representative or a senator. But I do think there's a core function about being able to articulate your views, where you stand on a particular issue. And I think that's part of the problem, right? I mean, it's, he might not be called upon to debate Dr. Oz under the hot lights and press people right there, but it's not unreasonable to say, hey, what's your position on fracking, and be able to get an answer that you understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't disagree with that. And it would be better if he were able to do that than not. And so the question for me, and I guess the question for a lot of voters is his impairment, and he's clearly impaired at this point, is it enough of an issue, and is it enough of an issue related to what we are looking for in a senator to make me want to vote for Oz over him, given what I understand to be the differences in their opinion, in their policy positions? And I think, for a lot of voters, for most voters, the answer would be no, not at all, right? Because in a 50,
they're going to vote for the jersey. Yeah.
Exactly. Because, and so that, I guess most people, of course, have their minds made up. And so, I don't know that if I were a Pennsylvania voter, I'd still vote for Fetterman, and it wouldn't even be a close decision for those reasons, because my main concern is, hey, who's going to be what party's going to be in control of the chamber? What is this going to mean for President Biden's judicial nominees? Because that's given what we know about the House, that's going to be about the only thing that's going to make a difference, right? Because the House is going to go Republican almost certainly. And so then it's a question of, well, I want to make sure as a Democrat that President Biden gets as many judicial nominees and appointments in his administration confirmed that are kind of along with my ideology. And that's not going to it's going to be less likely to happen if Oz is in that seat than if Fetterman's in that seat.
Yeah, no, I think that's not unreasonable. Yeah. But I'm going to play the card that you always play on me and say that you are truly exceptional. That not everyone thinks like that. And I think there are a lot of people out there who may be, for example, not particularly ideological or partisan, right? and you can even say naive or old fashioned and say, listen, I just want the best person who's going to represent me and my interests in the state as best they can.
I don't buy that. I don't buy that at all.
And I think you don't think there's a lot of,
nope.
No, I think there are a lot
I don't think so at all.
Like, I want the best, the best person.
I don't think that's now. If you were talking about maybe city council or something like that, I would be more inclined to buy that argument. But no, I'm sure there are people out there like that. But no, I think that's a vanishingly small number, actually. So,
but shouldn't we expect more of a senator than we would of a city council person, right?
Well, I think we expect different things. Right. I mean, and so a senator.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's a fair response. Yeah.
So senators, they may think the world revolves around them, but for the most part, senators are a vote, right? One way or the other for a bunch of things that the leadership decides to put forward. And that's why, I want to point out that's why, even though that this would not be a difficult decision for me, if I were a Pennsylvania voter, it would be a more difficult decision for me if this were a presidential election, because presidents have so much more individual authority than senators. That would give me a lot more pause if I thought that there were some kind of some sort of a deficit there. And that's why I think that's an important distinction to make. What do you think about that?
No, I think you're right in terms of I would also have that same pause, being an executive versus a legislator. You can be a subpar legislator. And the world's not going to, the stakes are just not as high, right? And I'll share a couple, because I had a couple thoughts on this whole thing, right? That one, I thought of so John Fetterman and Herschel Walker. I think you could certainly argue that Herschel Walker is not the ideal Senate candidate. He's not someone who is ideally situated or trained or has the natural talents that would recommend him to that position.
Yes, absolutely.
There was some funny memes or someone who had said that Herschel Walker is one of the strongest GOP Senate candidates ever. In which you and I said, yes, he can, he can definitely, out leg press.
Yeah, his bench press is really great. Yeah. Yeah.
But no, it's so in that case, I mean, to some extent, you are sort of asking people to, hey, vote for the jersey, right? Vote for the uniform. Now, I guess I come down to the distinction of who can do the job, and is it a matter of, listen, Herschel Walker may do the job poorly, but he can still more or less do it. As the question is, can Fetterman do it at all? And look, I think that's a fair question when you say that, look, the job doesn't necessarily entail standing up in front of hot lights and debating somebody else. My response is, but sometimes it does. In that we look for these people to articulate positions in our national debate. So that was my first thought is what's the difference between Fetterman and Herschel Walker?
I think that's an excellent point, because when you think about, say, a Herschel Walker, you think, well, in a lot of ways, he's, at least on the surface, he's this great candidate because, a football star, for Georgia, and a heroic kind of figure, right, to a lot of folks. And you think, well, he's also a black Republican, and that it ticks a lot of boxes. And so does Fetterman, right? I mean, he's this big hulking guy who looks like a kind of blue collarish sort of, kind of a Trumpy sort of, you expect to see him at a rally in Sturgis or something like that, and so and I think that's more and more what the parties are kind of focusing on when they recruit these candidates. And that necessarily doesn't mean that they're going to be great legislators, but it's almost like we're in a quasi parliamentary system where it's like, yeah, just shut up and vote for your party, and you're good to go, basically.
Yeah. So I think that's all correct. The other thing, of course, is we had talked about a week or so ago, celebrity candidates, right? Yeah, and is that a good thing or a bad thing? And I thought back about various celebrity candidates, and I guess I'm coming down to the And it's weird because look, Fetterman is not a celebrity candidate, right? He was lieutenant governor.
Yeah.
He was the mayor of wherever. My apologies. And became lieutenant governor. So look, he's actually gone through some political experience. Now I think that the jump to lieutenant governor was pretty significant, I suppose. But Mike, I have a story about Ohio Governor Mike DeWine, who I met one time. Not one time, I met a bunch of times. But one of his lines that he uses, one of his jokes he tells is, he was lieutenant governor under George Voinovich, and at that time he would say, "Well, you're lieutenant governor." He would introduce him, "So hi, I'm lieutenant governor," and the person would respond, "So what is it that you do?" And he says, "Well, I just did it."
Exactly. Yeah. It is not necessarily the most demanding job in the world.
Yeah. But anyway, but I also thought Ohio was for decades represented by another celebrity senator, and that was John Glenn.
Yeah.
Now you can say John Glenn was sort of a more serious person, right? He was a serious military guy. He was an astronaut. He was a decorated Korea veteran. He was a colonel. He had a great deal of a science background, going into NASA and so forth. And look, I'm I don't know if I've never seen their grades or their ACT scores. I'm betting John Glenn would have outscored Herschel Walker.
Did okay, yeah, I would say so.
So maybe that's a fair. But my point is, John Glenn didn't necessarily have political experience coming in. Yeah. And it was sort of coasting on the, hey, I'm an astronaut.
Sure.
I'm, the first guy to orbit the Earth. Which again, when you're looking for, well, what does the job of senator have to do with orbiting the Earth? Not a lot.
Not generally, no.
Anyway, I mean, I'm not saying I've got answers, responses, but I just think those are, if we're thinking about interesting parallels of celebrity candidates, celebrities.
It's not a brand new thing, certainly. But the other point I wanted,
my point is, there are some celebrities I think who can do great. And there are some people, career politicians, who are not suited.
Absolutely.
So I guess I'm looking at I don't knock out celebrities automatically, but nor do I say, aha, this is a godsend because they're famous already.
It's just the fact of being a celebrity doesn't necessarily mean anything. You want to look at background and experience and markers for intelligence and ability to be kind of thoughtful about things. So yeah, absolutely. The other point you made was about, and plenty of Democrats are wondering this too, I think, saying, well, why didn't they replace the guy? And I think, it's one of those hindsight 2020 sort of things. You could argue, for instance, that Connor Lamb, who finished second in that Democratic primary, would in some ways be maybe a better candidate. I mean, he has some congressional experience. He was elected in 2018, so not a lot, right? But his record in Congress puts him at the conservative end of the Democratic caucus in the House. But
that's sort of what they've been wanting to run this year.
Yeah, but okay, fine. But Fetterman didn't just beat him, but beat him decisively in that primary. I mean, he more than doubled Lamb's vote total. So if you're the party, right, and you say, well, okay, we have this guy who he has a serious health condition. Fetterman said it almost killed me. But clearly he was the choice of the party's folks. And so if you're going to pressure your clearly winning candidate to withdraw so you can replace him with I think everyone on the Democratic side in Pennsylvania was saying, well, you know what, let's kind of see what happens and hope for the best and that sort of thing. And so I don't think it's really fair to say, well, clearly the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania screwed up, because I think you would agree that anytime you try to make a decision to push out the clear and decisive choice of the people in an election, that's a big deal, and you should be very cautious about doing that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair argument. I think the response is, look, he just can't do it. Yeah. Right. But I think that would be and maybe your point is, well, we don't know that yet. Maybe he's going to get better. Yeah. And I think, I don't hear a whole lot of people, really anyone, saying,
questioning whether or not he has actually lost any real cognitive function. It's just a matter of processing time and so forth. So if there were questions, if I had heard legitimate questions about whether or not he actually can think rationally, if it's affected that, and I haven't heard anything along those lines. It's just a matter of being able to very quickly articulate and respond. And so that to me is not that big of a deal. What's that?
But would you hear that? I guess that's sort
a
of
fair
the reason
question.
why everyone wanted to have a debate, because it was the sense of, well, can we see him? And
well, the problem, of course, is debates are not designed, and this gets into every time we talk about debates, I say, 60 seconds to state your position and then 30 seconds for a response, or maybe 15 seconds. We'll and that's just, to me.
Yeah, no, it's a weird artificial sort of thing. And
So if we were going to do like a Lincoln Douglas sort of thing, I think, well, okay, that's maybe more of it. We'll give you 1 hour, Mr. Fetterman, to make your comments, and okay, that maybe tells you a little bit more, but that's not like that's going to happen. That would be awful TV, So,
but do you think that would have been better?
I think it probably would have been, because then you can sort of prepare comments and have a little bit of time. So yeah, I would have felt like that would have been given me more of a sense of things. But no, I think your point is fair that, we don't have any clear independent sense of what John Fetterman's ability to kind of think deeply about these, if it's been affected. And it's not crazy to say, well, maybe this is a problem. And voters, I think, should weigh that when making their decision, certainly. So, yeah.
Yeah. I'm just going to interject also a personal anecdote on this. Because back in my younger days, right, when I was a young Ohio House staff member, we had a member who was in a very, very similar situation. He had suffered a stroke. He had been elected already and had a stroke while in office. And it was a very difficult and sad sort of situation. And I'm not, to this day, right, I still have, there are kind of qualms about, but some of my duties, we would always have someone assigned to escort him to committee or to the House floor, because otherwise he could literally get lost, just not make it there, get confused about where he was. Likewise, we had to always make sure that, he was seated next to, a certain person who would tell him how to vote. And
that's
that troubles me, right? I mean, you're saying, look, we're just voting for the jersey. But is that right, I guess, I don't know the answer, and I don't know what necessarily the alternative would have been. I suppose, he was replaced the next term out. It was also one of those weird things of, these, House members serve 2-year terms. And he was, sort of into that second year already. And the sensible thing was, instead of, switching someone out as sort of doing a kindness for sort of an old man, of letting him finish out his career and retire, right, instead of being forced out. So there's that also. But anyway, I just, that it struck me a little bit that, look, this isn't the first time this kind of thing has happened. The other historical example that came to mind was Woodrow Wilson, who suffered a stroke during his second term in office. And, by what most historians say, I mean, it was Mrs. Wilson who was really running the country for a good, 2 years or so. And again, that's a difference, because it's an executive versus a legislative.
Or on some people would say more recently, President Reagan, who in his second term, a lot of people would say was showing some clear signs of early Alzheimer's, early dementia, and there are some people say, well, the answer to that is to require, or that candidates undergo some sort of cognitive screening and that be released and so forth. And I think that would be problematic for a lot of reasons, but I certainly would.
So I mean, the proxy we have for the cognitive screening is this debate process,
and unfortunately, it's a bad proxy. But I think it would be, again, I guess in a way, I'm sort of surprised that more candidates, if they think there are issues, don't say, "Hey, I've taken this test with an independent neuro."
Yeah.
Why, maybe the Oz folks were thinking about doing that, but thought it was, I don't know, over the top or something. But honestly,
Yeah.
I feel like that's the sort of information that would be useful for voters to have, because my sense of things is that John Fetterman is, while he's not verbally adept at this point, he is perfectly capable of carrying out the duties, but maybe I'm wrong about that. And how do I know? And so I certainly don't dismiss that point that you're making.
Yeah. And my last point on this goes back to sort of what I talked about, the sense of has there been some campaign deception, right? I mean, and obviously it's always in your best interest to paint your candidate to look as good as they can. But going with the Herschel Walker comparison again, I think everyone knew Herschel Walker was Herschel Walker. You know what I mean? No one
I don't know if they expected there were like abortions being popping up all over the place.
They may not have known specifics, right? They might
Sure.
have known specifics. But when someone, let's put it this way, when he was nominated, like, oh, you mean Herschel Walker, the football player, or Herschel Walker, the great orator?
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there was a sense of you knew what you were getting, more or less. Whereas I think with Fetterman, there might be, again, the sense of, listen, this is not a problem. This is not a problem. And well, yeah, it is. So,
yeah, or at least it potentially could be, I guess. And I guess the larger,
or you could have made the argument, again, this is a terrible political argument, but it's honest, is that the argument you just made. Listen, he has some difficulty in certain situations, but that has nothing to do with the job we're electing him to do.
And I think
that's not a great political argument, but I think it's an honest one.
Yeah, I think more generally this gets into how we select candidates, right? And it's through this process of campaigning. And if you go back, if this were happening, say, 50 years ago or more, well, then party bosses would be the ones who would be essentially making this decision. And it, we tend to think that more democratic processes are sort of almost always better, but I would suggest there are some instances in which, not necessarily so, because what voters learn in primary campaigns or in campaigns in general isn't necessarily a great proxy for what sort of job representatives will do. And I'm not suggesting we go back to that kind of, pre-primary process, but it's not like there weren't some advantages to it, at least in certain instances. So I also wanted to talk while we're on the campaign and the midterms, is that, last time on the show, we made our House and Senate predictions. And I wanted to say I'm still sticking by mine of either a 50-50 split in the Senate or maybe a one-seat Republican advantage and some pretty significant losses in the House. And Jay, I think your predictions were, well, Republicans might pick up one or two in the Senate, and we were pretty much the same on the House. And I'm wondering, before I go on, if you think that if anything you've seen would change your predictions on that.
I would say I would go a little, particularly after the Fetterman Oz debate, I would go a little harder into. I think my sense was Republicans pick up one, maybe two. Now I think it's Republicans pick up two.
Okay, and. I think in making those predictions, we discussed the problem that a lot of polling organizations have had, particularly with underestimating Republican support. But one thing we didn't get into was why polling in general these days might be more prone to error, because a lot fewer people now are just willing to answer a random call from an unknown caller. And I don't mean just Republicans, because I think about myself. And when I get unknown caller on my cell phone, which is my only phone, I hit decline pretty much all the time.
You, if you're like me, you probably get them 4 or 5 times a day.
Get a lot of them. Yeah. But I can think back to when I had a landline, and hey, the phone rings, you pick up the phone. At least that's how it was. And so that's a big difference. And I guess my point here is that we should probably all be a little less confident in the polls just in general than we were in the past. I think that the margin of error is necessarily greater, not just because Republicans are less likely to maybe respond to pollsters, but because everyone is. And so I think it's a lot harder to get a sense of that. And so I would say, regardless of what side you're on, don't put as much faith in the polls as you might have, say, 5 or 10 years ago, as a general rule. And I
think that's probably right.
Yeah.
And I think there's also more to the sense that there's always sort of this Heisenberg principle sort of thing at work, right? By observing, you change the system, right? And I think that has increased. That if that makes sense, the physics analogy might not hold up, but the more you observe, the more you alter the system, and I think and the more political heat is going on, right? The more you alter the system, and the more there's also almost an evolutionary response too, in terms of people either not answering the phone, or I will attest to this. Republicans who screw with pollsters. So
okay, sure.
I think that's.
It may not be common, but it might be common enough to make a difference at the margins.
Yeah.
And not only that, but I would argue that the fact that more and more there's not so much an election day, but an election period, which sort of complicates things as well. So the point being is there are a lot of moving parts. I know. I am looking right here now at my official absentee ballot, which I'm a much bigger fan of that. But the point being is there's a lot going on. It's a lot, I think, more difficult for pollsters than it was 10, 15, even 5 years ago, but certainly more than 10, 15 years ago. And people should bear that in mind.
Because also, I mean, what you say, and I think this is a good point. The election period, historically, there was always this sense of there's a time when people start paying attention, and it's after Labor Day, and it's sort of a broken down decision of when people start deciding who they want, and now that's all sort of fractured.
Yeah, absolutely. One
Although, and I will throw in my last argument that I think the Oz-Fetterman debate is just one of the many reasons why I prefer less of an election period and more of an election day.
Sure, and I think there's good reason to go, at least to keep that in mind, because, and now you could say, well, voters can just hold on to their absentee ballots until like a week before something. But you're right, things can happen, and those things can matter, and that is a disadvantage potentially. Is that once you've cast your ballot, it's like, well, it's not like you can say, hold on, can I have that back? That's it.
And keep in mind, think about how that played out in the Fetterman Lamb primary.
Yeah, absolutely. Because people who voted before they knew about the stroke sort of thing. So no quite. Yeah. Of course, the Fetterman campaign didn't say anything, but that's absolutely. So that is. I still think that the advantages well outweigh the disadvantages, but you make a reasonable point for it. It's not just across the board a better thing. Before we move on to the next story, I did want to mention last week, Trey talked about how political scientists focus on fundamentals more than individual campaigns, because history pretty strongly suggests that fundamentals matter more in elections. And one of those fundamentals Trey discussed was that the party in power typically loses seats in midterm elections, especially when the president has higher unfavorable than favorable ratings, which is the case here. Another one of those fundamentals Trey mentioned was the economy. When it's not strong, or at least when people don't see it as strong, voters have this tendency to punish the party in power. There was one other fundamental I wanted to add in, is that in elections, especially when you have an unpopular president, it's common that more undecided voters end up voting for the party that's not in power, breaking late. So if you have like 1 or 2% that are undecided right up until that final point, they tend to break more for the party not in power than the party in power, which I think gives Republicans even another advantage here. And so all of which I guess is to say that if in January of 2023, there are, say, 53 Republican senators, and the Republican Party has a 40-seat majority in the House, I would, of course, be hugely disappointed, but I would not be shocked at all. And so what I'm saying, I guess, is to fellow Democrats, prepare yourselves just in case, because this could be pretty ugly.
Winter is coming.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right. Winter is coming, unfortunately. There we go. Okay, Jay, so let's move on to something, on something else. On last week's show, Ken suggested that if Republicans retake the House, they'd be unlikely to approve more aid to Ukraine, and that the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin is basically counting on that, believing that essentially he only needs to hold out until early next year, at which point Russia will have this kind of ever-increasing advantage in Ukraine that will allow it to, if not take over the country entirely, at least to kind of secure those eastern regions that they are claiming now are rightfully Russian. And I'd say that this line of reasoning that Ken brought up is based on two things. First, the fact that every one of the votes opposing prior Ukraine aid has been cast by a Republican member of Congress. And second, Ken referred to those remarks made by House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy earlier this month, and McCarthy is likely to be the next Speaker of the House. He told Punchbowl News, "I think people are going to be sitting in a recession, and they're not going to write a blank check to Ukraine. They just won't do it. It's not a free blank check." And then there's things the Biden administration is not doing domestically, the border, people begin to weigh that. Ukraine is important, but at the same time, it can't be the only thing they do, and it can't be a blank check. So, Jay, I wanted to get your view on this. What do you think the prospects for Ukraine, for continued U.S. aid to Ukraine, are in what's almost certain to be a Republican House and possibly a Republican Senate as well?
Yeah, well, I was on a conference call with the Cuyahoga County Republican Party Executive Committee and Vladimir Putin just the other day, and we talked about this, about how we're working to kind of cut him some slack. Look, I think that's absolute nonsense. And I am, for people who don't get my joke sometimes, I really was not on a call with Putin.
That was a private call Jay had with Putin. So
exactly. No, I think it's sort of ridiculous. I think to the extent there were Republicans who voted against Ukraine aid, there was a weird sort of Trump piece kind of mixed in with that. That I think those votes were wrong, but there was also, as we've discussed a bunch of times, Mike, sort of the free vote phenomenon,
yeah.
Right? That look, if you know it's going to pass, and voting yes might hurt you even marginally, the rational thing to do. You may say it's not the correct or not the moral thing to do or the ethical thing to do, but is to vote your own personal interest, knowing that somebody else is going to pick up the slack for you. Back in my day in the legislature, instead of no votes, we called it taking a walk. That if there was a difficult vote for someone and it was an important issue, but you knew it was going to pass, that person would just, when the vote came up, take a walk and be absent. Or as President Obama called it, voting present, right? So I don't see that there is a big Republican push to defund Ukraine. In fact, I think in a lot of quarters, Republicans have been critical of the Biden administration for not doing more.
McCarthy's gotten some pushback from his own party on this.
Yeah, and I think McCarthy's statements were perhaps ill-advised, but also, and you gave the whole context, really. But to some extent also taken out of context, right?
Yeah.
I think it's entirely reasonable, whether it's Ukraine or Israel or NATO or any of our foreign obligations, right? That we say we're not writing a blank check. I think that's just sort of that's good public policy all the way around. Is you don't just write blank checks. But I think to read into that we are somehow reneging on support of Ukraine, I think misinterprets that.
Yeah.
So
now,
I think it was maybe some boneheaded language by partly by McCarthy and then partly taken out of context by the press.
But I do think that just politically, Republicans will probably, I agree with you that they're not going to not approve more aid to Ukraine, but I think they're also going to try to use it as leverage for other things, like, for instance, maybe some looser restrictions on domestic energy production or something like that. I think that they'll try to use that as leverage, basically, and I don't imagine you disagree with that. So
no, I don't necessarily disagree with it, and I would say that's what the Democrats really did a lot of the same stuff. And that's politics, and that's how it works. Is you tie something that is maybe less a little controversial to something that is not controversial, and if you so that if the person votes against it, you can say they voted against aiding the Ukraine. So, and I said the Ukraine. Obviously,
Ukraine. Yes.
It was that conference call with Putin. He kept calling it the Ukraine, and I just
got in your head. Yeah. But I think there's also an expectation that Republicans will call for more oversight over the funds that are spent. Now, in the last package, there were more oversight provisions, protections put in there. So it's not like we're just airdropping money into Ukraine. But I want to give folks some context here, because I think there's a tendency for us to take sides, to say, well, our side is the side of angels and everyone is good and pure and wonderful, and the other side, everyone is evil and awful and that sort of thing. Now, I'm okay if we're calling Vladimir Putin evil and awful and all that. That's fine. All right. But let's think about Ukraine for a minute. In a context I don't think we have so much. Around $65 billion has been appropriated by the U.S. to Ukraine so far, and most of that has been for weapons, or the bulk of it. But there are billions that are going to the Ukrainian government for things like economic support. There was, I think, just under $9 billion for that in the most recent aid package, and billions in training, law enforcement, that kind of thing. And so when that money goes for those things, you have to think, well, what is the capacity of the institutions in that country to be able to handle that amount of inflow so quickly? And one way of thinking about that, not the only way, but one way is thinking about it in terms of corruption. And Transparency International, which is a well-respected international organization, they rank Ukraine 122 out of 180 in their corruption perceptions index. That is not good. Not only that, but their corruption ranking for Ukraine, they've actually become, according to this ranking, slightly more corrupt over the past decade. And that ranking is...
These guys are probably just pools of Putin.
But I'm saying that ranking is barely higher than Russia's. Ukraine's corruption score, what they call it, is 32 out of 100, and lower is worse, okay? To give you a sense of context, their top-ranking country, Denmark, Finland, New Zealand have scores of 88. The U.S. is at 67. Russia's at 29. So we are giving all of this aid to a country that has some serious problems with its institutions, and that needs to be a factor. And so, if Russia had invaded, say, Georgia, which has a transparency score of 55, Latvia 59, Lithuania 61, we could be a little bit more confident that aid would be spent as intended. But I don't think it's unreasonable to say, well, we want to put a few more safeguards onto this money, especially money that's going directly to the government, not for, say, here's a tank, right, or something like that, because there is a greater possibility that that money's going to be misspent. And you can love Zelensky and all that. And, hey, I think he's been a heroic and inspirational leader, but you can have a great leader at the top, and that doesn't mean that everything below that doesn't have some problems. And so Ukraine's government has some problems, and we need to, I think that's important to keep that in mind.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I mean, to me, that sort of goes with any sort of foreign aid and really with domestic aid. I'd be curious what the corruption number is for Cuyahoga County and ARPA funds, right?
Yeah.
Certainly even what I'm saying is, even if we're spending money in our own country, you ought to watch for corruption. If we're spending it in a foreign country where we have less knowledge, less visibility, and there is less accountability, it's even a greater risk. So I agree with you 100%. I don't think when Kevin McCarthy says something, not a blank check, and we need to have safeguards and so forth. I don't think that's showing that you're weak on weak on Russia. It's that that's the responsible thing to do.
And my expectation here is that in November, the Republicans will win control of the House, maybe the Senate. And so there's a good likelihood that we're going to see another really big Ukraine aid package in the lame duck session. There's been talk of attaching maybe around up to as much as $50 billion in additional funding to the budget. And of course, the budget was supposed to be done by October 1st, but that never happens, right? Or rarely happens. It got pushed back by a continuing resolution to December 16th. And from the Democratic perspective, the nice thing about that is that's their last big shot at getting whatever they want into the budget, because once the Republicans take over one or both chambers, that's basically it for the Biden, the Biden administration and Democrats domestically, or in terms of any kind of major thing. And so, because the budget, you don't have to worry about a Republican filibuster. You just have to worry about is Joe Manchin for it, essentially, and you're good to go. And so that's kind of my expectations. We're going to see a big package go through in the lame duck session. I wanted to get your take on that as well.
Yeah, again, Vladimir is going to be disappointed. We were telling me you just hang on, but I think there will be significant. And again, I just personally, Mike. I mean, you and I have talked about this. We are old Cold Warriors, and my argument is give the Ukrainians everything they need, and maybe a little bit more. And I'd even be willing to accept a little bit of a corruption, right? I always kind of assume that's baked in, right?
Yeah, you have to. Yeah.
I think there was certainly probably corruption, baked into our Lend-Lease program to the British, and before World War II, or before we were involved in World War II. It's just human nature.
Definitely.
I'm thinking also like of, and this is fictional, of course, but movies like books like Catch-22, right? That documented. Listen, even in World War II, the good war, there's so much shadiness, black market, secondary kind of stuff going on, and I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I'm betting as a veteran of Desert Storm,
I've seen some stuff. Yeah, I could give you all kinds of examples.
Not every dollar was probably spent as intended.
No, sir.
So it's that's just par for the course, and I think oversight is necessary.
Yeah, and Jay, I'd say that you and I take second place to no one when it comes to our old Cold Warrior, anti-Soviet, anti-Russian ambitions kind of thing in Eastern and Central Europe. And so yeah, I'm certainly not suggesting that we don't do everything possible for Ukraine, and I don't think that's. I do believe that there are some members of Congress who feel that we shouldn't be doing it. And maybe there are some members of Congress who are, having chats with Vladimir Putin. I don't know, but I think that's such a small portion of the chamber that we don't have to realistically be all that concerned about our not standing by Ukraine in every important way to kind of keep Russia at bay, as it were.
Yeah, no, and there are to be sure isolationists out there, right? And I think they're wrong, but I don't think that necessarily equates to they're in bed with Putin.
Yeah, I agree, definitely. All right, so I think I want to continue a little bit on Russia and Ukraine, though maybe we'll move that into our midweek show, because I think that there are some things we want to get into that. But before, I'm looking at the clock here, and before we do finish our regular show, I'd like to talk about some, I guess you could call it good news, sort of goodish news, believe it or
Sure.
not, because we're all gloom and doom, but there was some good news this week. I mean, the U.S. economy grew at a 2.6 annual rate in the third quarter, and that was actually a surprise to a lot of analysts. We saw declines in the first half of 2022, and so I mean, right? It's a good thing. There was one
Yeah.
person put it. It's good that the economy is not collapsing. And I think we can all agree that that's a good thing. But at the same time, the economic conventional wisdom suggests that a recession in the next year is probably still more likely than not. Especially the Fed meets I think next week, and there's almost certainly going to be another rate hike. But at the very least, this GDP data suggests that maybe there's still at least the possibility of kind of a soft landing, as they call it, or at least a relatively mild recession. And so that's my take on it. Jay, how do you see this latest data?
No, I think I agree. I think it's not like great news, but it's not bad news. I guess that's probably you know what I mean. You look at it. And, you beat expectations upwards. So generally, that's good. That gives the sense that what the Fed is doing is working gradually, and we're heading for a soft or at least softer landing. I think that's good. What I'm a little concerned is does that signal the Fed of like, well, hell, we'll just raise rates more? I don't think it does. I think it just will indicate that tell them to stay the course. And I think part of these again we're still in such a weird time, right? Of just coming back from COVID and sort of the international shock with the war in Ukraine. I think it's good news. Is it great news? No, but it's better than continued contraction.
It's good that the economy is not collapsing. Do you think it's good for? I mean, do you think this matters politically at all with the midterms elections being, ended here in a little bit? Because I was going to say coming up.
Yeah, my sense is kind of too little, too late, right? I don't think that you can turn on. And again, to me, the bigger issue when people talk about the economy, it's less of the recession. It's more inflation. Right. That's the issue that hits you when you go to the grocery store. Sort of some economists saying, hey, the economy grew at 2.6% last quarter. I don't think people are like, well, hey, perfect. I mean, but the price of milk is still what it is. It's still a whole lot more than it was a year ago. So I don't think it translates into nor does this it give you this sense of, hey, we've turned the corner. This is an ascendant economy. It's sort of like, things weren't as bad as we thought they were. You know what I mean? It's not the, there was a sense, I guess, back during the Reagan days, right? I mean, we had the Reagan recession, which was not dissimilar to this one in terms of, there was really high inflation, and what the Fed did was raised rates significantly and put the country into a recession. 1982, 83. But then you had the sense in, midway through 1982 or into 1983 that there was this turn the corner, and there's this upward slope, right? Every month it kept getting better and better and better. There was this sort of, new day in America. I don't see this one month being that sort of, morning in America again type moment.
Well, I mean, it's one good quarter, and it's a surprise certainly, but there aren't. You'd be hard pressed to find anyone who says, "Yep, we're good to go now. Just given all the factors, the OPEC cuts and the war in Ukraine, and still the uncertainty from the pandemic. And yeah, it's definitely
And
not.
again, it wasn't like a 6% growth or something like that. Like, wow. I mean, it was like,
Yeah, exactly. So, all right. Well, on that at least not horrifically negative note, we will end things. But we have a lot to talk about that we didn't get to, and we want to get to some of that in the midweek show. Like, again, more on Russia and Ukraine. Will we see a nuclear weapons release, or dirty bombs, or Elon Musk's satellites start coming down in droves or something like that? We're going to get into all that. More on COVID, unfortunately, I guess, but and a whole bunch of other stuff along those lines. So if you are a supporter, you will be hearing all about that on Tuesday when our show comes out. If you're not, we hope you'll consider becoming a supporter. Supporters are what keep our show going. When you become a supporter, you get all sorts of good things. You get ad-free versions of everything we put out. You get that midweek show. You get our deepest appreciation as well for whatever that is worth. We hope it's worth.
Are we going to do recommendations this week?
Oh, yeah. I told you. Why don't we can do that? Absolutely. So, yeah.
We can do them now.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's be crazy. Break protocol. Yeah. What, you got a recommendation, Jay? Go ahead. Please do.
I do. So this was weird because a couple times you've done recommendations and sometimes I just come up short. But I'm in sort of like a seasonal mood, right? And so I wanted to recommend my seasonal reading. And that is, again, stuff that you probably knew about or read a long time ago when you were a kid, but didn't realize how cool it was. And one of those things would be Washington Irving's Legend of Sleepy Hollow. It's, again, short little novella kind of thing. You can read it before Halloween. But there's a lot going on in that, and it's a lot less a story about ghostly Hessians and more about the incursion of the English into what had been the New Amsterdam, a Dutch colony, and it's I read it. Again, as a grown up, a year or so ago, and it's absolutely fascinating that the Ichabod Crane is the bad guy, in that he is sort of an incursion into this Dutch, otherwise Dutch world. He's trying to hit on Katrina van Tassel, and Brom Bones is actually sort of the good guy defending the Dutch against these dumb English people. So anyway, I think it's fun to go back and reread something like that, and the writing also is just great, right? And a lot of times you don't appreciate that when you're a kid, you're younger, and you're. My other seasonal reading is sort of the same vein. Short stories of H.P. Lovecraft.
Ooh, good one.
Which is like totally just super fun. So yeah, creepy, weird, and it's also got this wonderful sort of early 20s, it's like 20s, 30s kind of almost like an Indiana Jones sort of quality to it, maybe in some cases.
Lovecraft is deeply weird sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, and but yeah, it's this sort of horror / science fiction. Call of Cthulhu is sort of a novella short story, and it's just really fantastic. People may come after say Lovecraft was a sort of inveterate racist, and I think there's ample evidence for that. But it doesn't come through really in any of his stories, and they're still really super creepy and super fun, and the writing is just really fun. And my last, because I'm getting all my recommendations out, but also for seasonal, there's also, this is your time. You can start reading Mayflower by Nathaniel Philbrick so that you'll be ready for Thanksgiving. But those are my three recommendations.
Wow. Okay. That's
Sleepy Hollow, Lovecraft, and get a head start on Mayflower.
Jay coming through with the seasonally appropriate recommendations. Very, very impressive. And we will have links to all of those in the show notes. Now, I feel like I should come up with something, and I will come up with something very, very different. In my life, I spend a lot of time typing things, right? I'm in front of a keyboard a lot. And I think for a lot of folks, that's the case. And I recently sort of got in. There is a whole, this probably shouldn't surprise folks. There's a whole computer keyboard subculture. Of course there is, right? But I recently had my eyes opened. I bought a thing called the Keychron Q3 keyboard. And it's like, if you've never used a high quality keyboard, it's like you've been driving in a soapbox derby car your whole life, and this is like moving from that to a Bentley. It's just it blows my mind. It makes me want to write stuff. It's just so amazingly better and different from anything I'd ever experienced. I just, like I said, it is mind blowing. Now, it's not necessarily cheap, but if you have a few bucks and you want to really have a luxury typing experience, I highly, highly recommend, and they have them in all kinds of sizes and so forth, but it really just opened my eyes. So anyway, that'll be my recommendation. All right. So then before we go, if you would like to become a supporter of the show, you can go to patreon.com/politicsguys. If you'd like to support us on Venmo or @politicsguys, you can also support the show through PayPal. And all of our support links are always in the show notes, as well as at politicsguys.com/support. And if you would like to get that supporters midweek show, but you're just not in a position to financially support us right now, not a problem. Send me an email, mike@politicsguys.com, and I will get you set up with that midweek show. And whether you're a supporter or not, it really does help if you can spread the word. However, especially through sharing episodes on social media, it's probably the easiest way. We would very much appreciate that. And finally, as always, a special thanks to our wonderful executive producers, Bruce Johnson, Wilma Moreno, Andra Masker, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, and Don Oglesby. Jay and I will be back with a new episode for you next week. We hope you'll join us.